You are 12 years old, and you do not yet understand that your body is not your own. The year is 1443 AD, and you stand in the great hall of Bleo Castle, watching men in rich velvet and fur discuss your future as if you were a prized mare at market. Your name is Margaret Beaufort, and though noble blood runs through your veins, you are learning that lineage means nothing when you are born female in a world ruled by men who see daughters as coins to be spent. The rushes beneath your feet smell of mint and rosemary, scattered fresh this morning to mask the winter dampness that seeps through stone walls 3 feet thick. Candlelight flickers across the faces of lords and bishops who speak in low, urgent tones about alliances and inheritances, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. You pull your woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, but the chill you feel has nothing to do with the weather. Your guardian, William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, gestures toward you with a ringed hand that catches the firelight. The girl brings substantial holdings, he says, his voice carrying the authority of a man who has never doubted his right to decide the fate of others. Her inheritance includes lands in Somerset, Devon, and Dorset. A marriage alliance now secures those holdings for our cause. You want to ask what cause he means, but 12-year-old girls do not interrupt when powerful men are speaking. Instead, you watch the face of John de la Pole, Suffolk's son, who will become your husband before the month is out. He is perhaps 14, still gangly with youth, his hands too large for his wrists. He glances at you once quickly, then looks away as if the sight of you embarrasses him. Share your commitment with the phrase "I practice inner strength" in the comments, and let's embark on this mysterious historical journey to reconnect with our own truth. Ready? Let's begin diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to Historical Mysteries for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. Margaret Beaufort was born in 1443 AD into a world where her very existence was both blessing and curse. As the daughter and sole heiress of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, she carried in her bloodline a claim to the English throne that would shape every moment of her life. The Beaufort line descended from John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and his mistress Catherine Swynford, a love affair that had been legitimized by marriage and royal decree, though the stain of bastardy would forever follow their descendants like a shadow. When Margaret was barely 6 months old, her father died, leaving her one of the wealthiest heiresses in England. In the 15th century, this was not a gift, but a burden. Wealthy orphans became wards of the crown, their marriages arranged to serve the political needs of whoever held power. Margaret's wardship was granted to William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, a man who understood that controlling a child's marriage meant controlling her inheritance. The Great Hall, where 12-year-old Margaret now stands, has witnessed countless such negotiations. The walls, built of gray limestone quarried from local hills, have absorbed decades of whispered conspiracies and shouted demands. Tapestries depicting scenes of noble hunts hang between the windows, their threads faded but still showing lords on horseback pursuing deer through painted forests. The irony is not lost on Margaret. Even at 12, she too is prey being pursued by hunters. Suffolk's voice continues, outlining the terms of the marriage contract as if Margaret were not standing 3 feet away. The ceremony will take place at Bletsoe within the fortnight. The girl's lands will be administered by my house until she reaches majority. What he does not say, but what everyone in the room understands. is that this arrangement ensures Suffolk's family will control Margaret's vast wealth for years to come. The rushes crackle under shifting feet as the assembled men nod their agreement. Margaret can smell the sweet decay of the herbs mixed with the earthier scents of wool and unwashed bodies. Even nobles in 1443 AD bathed infrequently, and the Great Hall holds the accumulated odor of a dozen men who have ridden hard through winter mud to attend this negotiation. Margaret's soon-to-be husband, John de la Pole, shifts uncomfortably near the great fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, revealing the uncertainty he tries to hide. At 14, he is as much a pawn in this game as Margaret. Though his gender grants him the illusion of agency, he will inherit his father's titles and lands. She will simply transfer hers to him upon marriage, as the law demands. The wedding and its aftermath. The wedding ceremony takes place on a February morning when frost covers the ground like scattered pearls. Margaret wears a gown of deep blue silk, the color of royalty. Though the fabric feels foreign against her skin, the dress has been tailored to fit her slight frame, but the weight of the silk and the elaborate headdress make her feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The chapel at Bletsoe is small and cold, with stone walls that seem to absorb sound and light. Candles flicker in iron sconces, casting wavering shadows that make the painted saints on the walls appear to move. Margaret kneels on the stone floor, her knees already aching through the thin fabric of her dress, and speaks the Latin words that will bind her to a boy she barely knows. Ego Johannes, to Margarita, in uxorem accipio, John recites, his voice cracking slightly on the unfamiliar syllables. I, John, take you, Margaret, as my wife. Take you. The words echo in the small space, binding her future to his with a finality that makes her stomach turn. Margaret responds with her own vows, her voice steadier than her hands. Ego Margareta, te Johannem, in virum accipio. I, Margaret, take you, John, as my husband. The words taste like ash in her mouth, but she speaks them clearly because she has been trained since birth to do her duty regardless of her feelings. The marriage is consummated that same night, though both children are too young to understand what is happening to them. Medieval law required consummation to make a marriage valid, but it also recognized that children could not give meaningful consent. This contradiction that a marriage could be both legal and harmful would define much of Margaret's early life. In the months that follow, Margaret begins to understand the reality of her situation. She lives in the de la Pole household, where she is treated with the respect due to her rank, but with the controlling oversight applied to valuable property. Every aspect of her life is supervised and regulated. She cannot travel without permission, cannot correspond with anyone outside the household, and cannot make decisions about her own lands or income. The transformation from childhood to political commodity becomes most apparent during meals in the Great Hall. Margaret sits at the high table beside her young husband, wearing the elaborate headdresses and rich fabrics that mark her status. But she is not permitted to speak unless directly addressed. She watches the adults around her discuss matters of state, military campaigns, and political alliances, always aware that her own future depends on decisions made by others. The food itself tells the story of hierarchy and control. Margaret is served choice cuts of meat and exotic spices that demonstrate her family's wealth, but she cannot choose what to eat or when to eat it. Servants bring her predetermined portions at predetermined times, just as they manage every other aspect of her daily routine. Even her diet is not her own. During these months, Margaret begins to display the intelligence and determination that will later make her one of the most powerful women in English history. She listens carefully to every conversation, filing away information about political alliances, military strategies, and the complex web of relationships that govern the nobility. She learns to read the subtle signs of power which lords command genuine respect, which rely on fear, and which are merely decorative figures propped up by others. A shifting fate. The year 1444 AD brings news that will change Margaret's life forever. John de la Pole, her 14-year-old husband, dies suddenly of fever. The official records provide no details about his illness, noting only that he died at his family's estate in Suffolk. Margaret, now a 13-year-old widow, finds herself in a position that is both liberating and terrifying. Under English law, Margaret's marriage to John de la Pole had never been fully consummated in the legal sense. They were both too young for the marriage to be considered complete. This technicality means that Margaret's inheritance remains her own, not transferred to her deceased husband's family. She is once again one of the wealthiest heiresses in England and once again available for marriage. The news of John's death reaches Margaret in a way that reveals the casual cruelty of her situation. She is sitting in the solar, the private chamber where noblewomen spend their days, working on an embroidered altar cloth under the supervision of her attendants. The needle in her hand is creating tiny, precise stitches in silk thread, a kind of delicate work that demonstrates both her noble status and her training in domestic arts. William de la Pole enters the solar without ceremony, his face grave, but his eyes calculating. "Your husband is dead," he tells her, his voice carrying no warmth or comfort. "Fever took him in the night." Margaret's needle stops mid-stitch, but she does not look up from her work. She has learned that showing emotion in front of powerful men is dangerous. It reveals weakness they can exploit. "I see," she says quietly, continuing her embroidery with steady hands. The thread is deep gold, the color of royal regalia, and each stitch represents hours of training in the skills deemed appropriate for noblewomen. Margaret has become expert at these small, precise tasks, just as she has learned to keep her thoughts and feelings carefully controlled. Suffolk watches her reaction with the attention of a merchant evaluating merchandise. Margaret's composure impresses him. She is displaying the self-control that will make her valuable in future negotiations. A girl who can receive news of her husband's death without weeping or fainting is a girl who can be trusted to behave appropriately in any political situation. You will remain in this household until other arrangements can be made. Suffolk continues, his tone making it clear that these arrangements will be made without consulting Margaret's preferences. Your mourning period will be observed naturally but not extended unnecessarily. Margaret nods, understanding the implications. Her mourning period will last exactly as long as it takes Suffolk to negotiate her next marriage. She is 13 years old, has been married and widowed, and is about to be sold again to serve the political needs of men who see her as a valuable asset rather than a human being. A glimpse of freedom and the weight of wealth. The months of Margaret's widowhood provide her with a brief taste of relative freedom. Though she remains under Suffolk's control, she spends her days in study, working with tutors who teach her Latin, French, and the basics of estate management. These lessons are not intended to prepare her for independence. Women of her class are never truly independent, but to make her a more valuable wife to her next husband. Margaret proves to be an exceptional student, displaying a quick mind and an appetite for learning that surprises her tutors. She masters Latin with the fluency of a scholar, enabling her to read religious texts and legal documents in their original language. Her French is elegant and sophisticated, marking her as a woman who can participate in the international diplomacy that shapes noble marriages. Most importantly, she begins to understand the complex financial arrangements that govern her inheritance. The account books that detail Margaret's holdings reveal the true scope of her wealth. She owns thousands of acres of productive farmland, generating rents that provide enormous annual income. Her estates include not just agricultural land, but also valuable resources like stone quarries, timber forests, and water rights for mills and fisheries. The total value of her inheritance makes her one of the richest individuals in England. regardless of gender. This wealth, however, comes with a price that Margaret is beginning to understand. Every acre of land she owns, every pound of annual income her estates generate, makes her more valuable as a political alliance. Her inheritance cannot be separated from her body. To marry Margaret is to gain control of her lands. She cannot refuse marriage without losing everything she has inherited from her father. The reality of Margaret's situation becomes clear during a conversation with her mother, Margaret Beauchamp, who visits Bletsoe Castle in the spring of 1445 AD. The two women sit in the castle's herb garden, where early flowers are beginning to bloom despite the lingering chill in the air. The garden provides a rare opportunity for private conversation away from the ears of servants and courtiers who report every word to Suffolk. Margaret Beauchamp is a woman who has survived her own arranged marriages and political maneuvering. She looks at her 14-year-old daughter with eyes that hold both love and resignation. "You must understand," she says, her voice low and urgent, "that your inheritance is both your strength and your chain. The lands your father left you will provide you with wealth and influence, but they will also ensure that you are never free to choose your own path." Young Margaret listens carefully, her hands folded in her lap in the posture of attentive obedience that has been trained into her since childhood. But her mind is active, processing the implications of her mother's words. She's beginning to understand that her wealth makes her powerful in some ways, but completely vulnerable in others. "What would happen if I refused to marry?" Margaret asks, though she already suspects the answer. Her mother's expression confirms her fears. "Your wardship would be sold to another lord who would have the right to force your marriage or confiscate your lands as punishment for disobedience." Margaret Beauchamp explains, "A woman's inheritance exists only as long as she remains obedient to the men who control her. Refuse to marry, and you become a rebel against the natural order. Rebels lose everything." The conversation takes place beside a bed of herbs, lavender, rosemary, and thyme, whose scents will forever remind Margaret of this moment of understanding. The flowers around them represent domesticity and feminine virtue, but they also represent the narrow boundaries within which noble women must live their lives beautiful, fragrant, and utterly contained. A second marriage and a royal command. Summer brings news of Margaret's next marriage. King Henry VI, influenced by his advisors and political allies, has granted Margaret's wardship to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond. The arrangement serves multiple political purposes. It strengthens the Tudor family's position at court, provides Edmund with Margaret's substantial income, and creates an alliance between the Lancastrian and Tudor factions that will prove crucial in the coming Wars of the Roses. Edmund Tudor is approximately 24 years old, making him a decade older than Margaret. He is the son of Owen Tudor and Catherine of Valois, the widow of King Henry V. This connection to the royal family makes Edmund a valuable political ally, but it also makes him a man accustomed to getting what he wants. He has been promised Margaret's hand in marriage along with control of her inheritance, and he intends to claim both. The negotiations for Margaret's second marriage take place at Westminster Palace in the autumn of 1445 AD. Margaret is now 14, old enough to understand the political implications of her marriage, but still too young to have any legal right to refuse. She travels to Westminster with a small retinue, accompanied by guards and attendants who are there to ensure her compliance rather than her comfort. Westminster Palace in 1445 AD is a sprawling complex of buildings that serves as both royal residence and seat of government. The Great Hall, where Margaret's marriage contract is negotiated, is one of the largest enclosed spaces in Europe. The walls soar upward into shadows, and the floor is covered with rushes that rustle underfoot with every movement. The sound of footsteps echoes in the vast space, making private conversation impossible. Margaret stands beside a pillar carved with intricate designs, watching the men who will decide her future. Edmund Tudor is tall and powerfully built, with the confidence of a man who has never doubted his right to take what he wants. He speaks to the king's advisors with easy familiarity, discussing Margaret's inheritance as if she were not present. "The girl's lands will provide substantial income for our household," Edmund says. his voice carrying clearly in the echoing hall. With proper management, the estate should yield enough to support our position at court and fund our military obligations. He glances at Margaret briefly, evaluating her as he might assess a promising horse. She is young, healthy, and wealthy, everything a nobleman could want in a wife. King Henry VI, barely 24 himself, and already showing signs of the mental instability that will later lead to civil war, nods his approval of the marriage. The king's endorsement is crucial because it makes the marriage a royal command rather than a private arrangement. Margaret cannot refuse without committing treason against the crown, Countess of Richmond and mother to a king. The wedding ceremony takes place at Bletsoe Castle in early 1446 AD, when Margaret is 14 years old. The ritual is more elaborate than her first marriage, befitting Edmund's higher status and the political importance of the alliance. Margaret wears cloth of gold, the most expensive fabric available, and a circlet of precious stones that marks her rank as a future countess. The ceremony itself blends religious solemnity with political theater. The Bishop of Winchester officiates, lending the full authority of the church to the proceedings. Noble witnesses fill the chapel, their presence ensuring that the marriage cannot be questioned or annulled. Margaret speaks her vows in a clear, steady voice, having learned that showing reluctance or emotion only invites speculation about her suitability as a wife. Edmund Tudor's vows are confident and possessive. When he places the ring on Margaret's finger, his hand completely covers hers, a physical reminder of the power dynamic that will govern their marriage. The ring itself is heavy gold set with a sapphire beautiful, but so large that it weighs down Margaret's small hand. She will wear it for the rest of her life, a constant reminder of this moment when her independence was formally surrendered. The consummation of Margaret's second marriage takes place that same night. And this time, there is no question of the participants being too young. Margaret is 14, considered fully adult by medieval standards. And Edmund is an experienced man who understands exactly what he is claiming. The encounter is brief, functional, and entirely focused on establishing Edmund's legal and physical dominance over his new wife. Margaret's adjustment to married life with Edmund Tudor reveals the stark realities of 15th century marriage for even the wealthiest women. She is now the Countess of Richmond, a title that grants her social prominence but no actual power. Every decision about her life, her property, and her future is made by Edmund, who exercises his legal authority with the casual confidence of a man who has never questioned his right to control others. The household they establish at Carmarthen Castle in Wales reflects Edmund's political ambitions and military background. The castle is a fortress rather than a palace, built for defense rather than comfort. Margaret's daily routine is structured around Edmund's needs and preferences, with her own desires considered only when they do not conflict with his priorities. Edmund's approach to managing Margaret's inheritance reveals both his political acumen and his fundamental disregard for her as an individual. He immediately begins reorganizing her estates, installing his own men as stewards and bailiffs. The income from Margaret's lands is diverted to fund Edmund's military campaigns and political activities. With no consideration for her preferences or concerns, Margaret watches these changes with growing understanding of her situation. She is wealthy in name but powerless in practice. Her inheritance provides the resources for Edmund's ambitions, but she has no say in how those resources are used. She is learning that being a noblewoman means being valuable property rather than a person with agency. The political situation in England during 1446 and 1447 AD is increasingly unstable, with tensions building between different factions of the nobility. Edmund Tudor's position as a supporter of the Lancastrian cause puts him and Margaret in potential danger as opposition to King Henry VI's weak rule grows stronger. Margaret finds herself caught in political conflicts she did not choose and cannot escape. In late 1456 AD, when Margaret is 13 years old, but married to Edmund, who is significantly older, she discovers she is pregnant. The news brings both joy and terror. Joy because producing an heir is her primary duty as a wife. And terror because she understands the physical dangers of childbirth for someone her age. Medieval medical knowledge about pregnancy and birth is limited and often dangerous, making every pregnancy a potential death sentence. Margaret's pregnancy progresses through the winter of 1456 and into 1457 AD, a time when political tensions in England are reaching a breaking point. Edmund is frequently away from home, involved in military campaigns that keep him from providing any support during Margaret's difficult pregnancy. She faces the physical and emotional challenges of impending motherhood, essentially alone, attended only by servants and midwives. The political situation deteriorates further when Edmund Tudor is captured by Yorkist forces in August 1456 AD. He is imprisoned at Carmarthen Castle, where he dies of fever in November 1456 AD. Margaret, now about 7 months pregnant, receives the news of her husband's death while dealing with the physical and emotional strain of her advanced pregnancy. Edmund's death leaves Margaret in a precarious position. She is a pregnant widow with vast wealth but no male protector, making her both valuable and vulnerable. The child she carries could be a son who will inherit Edmund's titles and her lands, or a daughter who will face the same fate Margaret has endured. Either way, the baby will be born into a world where political violence and arranged marriages are routine. The birth of a dynasty. Margaret goes into labor at Pembroke Castle in Wales on January 28, 1457 AD, at the age of 13. The birth is difficult and dangerous, as is typical for someone her age. Medieval childbirth is attended by midwives whose knowledge is based on experience rather than medical training, and the mortality rates for both mothers and babies are horrifyingly high. The labor lasts for hours, with Margaret experiencing pain that no 13-year-old should endure. The midwives do their best to help, but their methods are limited to herbal remedies and prayers. Margaret's small frame makes the birth particularly difficult, and there are moments when both she and the baby are in mortal danger. The child who emerges from this ordeal is a son, healthy and strong despite the circumstances of his birth. Margaret names him Henry after the king, a political choice that signals her continued loyalty to the Lancastrian cause. The boy will grow up to become Henry VII, the first Tudor king of England. But in January 1457 AD, he is simply a newborn whose survival depends on his 13-year-old mother's ability to navigate the dangerous world of medieval politics. Margaret's recovery from childbirth is slow and difficult. Medieval medical care for new mothers is minimal, and the physical trauma of giving birth at such a young age leaves her weak and vulnerable. She will never have another child. Though whether this is due to medical complications from Henry's birth or other factors remains unclear. What is certain is that the experience of pregnancy and childbirth at 13 has profound and lasting effects on her health and her outlook on life. The early months of Henry's life are marked by uncertainty and danger. Margaret is a widow with an infant son surrounded by political enemies who would gladly eliminate both of them to claim her inheritance. She must find a way to protect herself and her child while navigating the complex web of alliances and enmities that define noble society. Margaret's solution to her vulnerable position is to seek another marriage, this time to a man who can provide protection for both her and her son. Her choice falls on Sir Henry Stafford, the younger son of the Duke of Buckingham. This marriage, her third, is different from her previous unions because Margaret herself plays a more active role in the negotiations. Henry Stafford is approximately 30 years old, making him significantly older than Margaret, but not old enough to be her grandfather. He is an experienced soldier and courtier who understands the political realities of the time. More importantly, he is willing to protect Margaret's son and respect her role as Henry's mother, something that was not guaranteed in 15th century marriages. The marriage to Henry Stafford takes place in 1458 AD when Margaret is 15 years old. This ceremony is smaller and more private than her previous weddings, reflecting both the political situation and Margaret's changed circumstances. She is no longer a valuable virgin being traded for political advantage, but a widow with a child seeking protection and stability. Margaret's relationship with Henry Stafford proves to be the most stable and supportive of her marriages. Stafford treats her with genuine respect and affection, allowing her to develop her intellectual abilities and begin participating in political activities. Under his protection, Margaret begins to emerge as a political figure in her own right, rather than simply as a valuable piece of property. Political maturation and the path to power. The years of Margaret's marriage to Henry Stafford, from 1458 to 1471 AD, mark a period of relative stability in her personal life. Even as England descends into the chaos of the Wars of the Roses, Margaret uses this stability to develop her political skills and begin building the network of alliances that will eventually help her son claim the throne. During this period, Margaret becomes deeply involved in the Lancastrian cause, using her wealth and influence to support the faction that she believes offers the best chance for her son's future. She develops relationships with other noble families, provides financial support for military campaigns, and begins to understand how power really works in medieval England. Margaret's political education during these years is comprehensive and practical. She learns to read the subtle signals that indicate shifting alliances, to understand the economic factors that drive political decisions, and to recognize the personal motivations that influence public actions. Most importantly, she learns to use her wealth and social position to influence events rather than simply react to them. The death of Henry Stafford in 1471 AD marks the end of Margaret's most stable marriage and the beginning of her emergence as one of the most powerful women in England. She is now 28 years old, experienced in the ways of politics and court life, and determined to secure her son's future regardless of the obstacles in her path. Margaret's fourth and final marriage is to Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derby, a man whose political flexibility and survival instincts match her own. Stanley is a powerful nobleman who has managed to maintain his position through multiple changes of regime, making him an ideal partner for Margaret's political ambitions. Their marriage, which takes place in 1472 AD, is a partnership based on mutual respect and shared political goals. Under Stanley's protection, Margaret begins to operate more openly as a political figure. She maintains correspondence with other noble families, provides financial support for causes she favors, and begins to position herself as a potential kingmaker. Her son Henry is still in exile, but Margaret is laying the groundwork for his eventual return to England. The 1470s and 1480s are a period of intense political activity for Margaret. She navigates the complex and dangerous world of Yorkist rule under Edward IV and later Richard III, always working to advance her son's interests while avoiding the fate of nobles who miscalculate their political positions. Her survival and success during this period demonstrate the political skills she has developed since her childhood as a powerless pawn. Margaret's relationship with Richard III is particularly complex and dangerous. When Richard seizes the throne in 1483 AD, Margaret must decide whether to accept the new regime or risk everything to support her son's claim. Her decision to support Henry's invasion of England in 1485 AD represents the culmination of decades of political planning and personal sacrifice. Triumph and legacy. The Battle of Bosworth Field in August 1485 AD marks the moment when Margaret's long campaign to secure her son's future finally succeeds. Henry Tudor's victory over Richard III makes him King Henry VII and transforms Margaret from a political schemer into the mother of the ruling monarch. She is now 52 years old and has achieved a level of power and influence that would have been unimaginable when she was married off at the age of 12. Margaret's position as the king's mother grants her unprecedented authority for a woman of her time. She is given the title, My Lady, the King's Mother, and exercises influence over court appointments, policy decisions, and royal marriages. She has transformed her inherited wealth and her painful experiences into genuine political power. The irony of Margaret's success is that it comes at the cost of her own happiness and fulfillment. She has spent her entire adult life fighting for her son's future. sacrificing her own desires and opportunities to secure his position. Her victory is complete, but it is also hollow. She has gained power, but lost the possibility of personal happiness. Margaret's later years are marked by both triumph and tragedy. She sees her son establish the Tudor dynasty and secure the throne for his descendants. But she also experiences the pain of outliving many of her contemporaries and watching the political world she helped create develop beyond her control. She dies in 1509 AD, shortly after her son, having lived to see her grandson Henry VIII begin his reign. The legacy of Margaret Beaufort extends far beyond her immediate family. She is remembered as one of the most powerful women in English history, a figure who transformed personal trauma into political authority. This incredible journey through Margaret Beaufort's life reminds us that history is not just about kings and battles, but about the extraordinary resilience of individuals caught in extraordinary times. Don't miss out on more captivating stories like this. Subscribe to Historical Mysteries and join our growing community of history enthusiasts